thanks to Taz for setting up the live stream, so we're broadcasting this online. Don't worry, you're not on it. It's down the aisle. But people are tuning in about 8:15 to join us, so we'll see how many people do. But just for their sake, I want to let them know we are just about on track, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. You don't have to be all quiet.
Welcome to our very first book launch here at Upper Dublin Lutheran Church. I didn't think I ever would be able to say something like that, but I just did. And I have never introduced an author, so this is another first for me. But I just want you to know just how pleased we are that we can do this evening. When Keith first came to us a couple years back, he came with one book already under his belt, but this most recent endeavor of his makes kind of feel like it's ours. Because he is our pastor, as we know, but he's also our friend. And having said that, perhaps some of you are not aware of the fact that our pastor has been very much in demand in the field of social ministry. He is requested many, many times to be a guest speaker on the subject. He has also been sought out to offer some help and guidance for other pastors' ministries and also in the academic world. But the good news is, with all this awareness of other people, he's ours. And because he's ours, we have benefited so much. Just in the short time that Keith and Jenny and their 4 beautiful children have been with us, because they come as a package. And anybody sitting in this room who is a pastor knows that that's the way it works, perhaps in that profession more than any other profession. But since they've been here, Keith has significantly transformed our ministry here in the way in which we not only receive the good news, but the way in which we spread it. And for that, we will be forever grateful. So I asked you to bring your cups in with you because we're going to toast, hands in the air, to our author, and more importantly, our pastor, Keith Anderson.
Thank you so much, Dottie. Even though I travel around a lot, that's the best introduction I've ever gotten. You're going to have to travel with me for that. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Wow, I'm just so overwhelmed by this turnout and for all your love and support for me and this project and for this night and this book launch. Thank you so much. The feeling of writing a book goes from terror to really grinding it out, to a sense of accomplishment, to a sense of relief, and then I think finally to a sense of gratitude for all the people that made possible the book. And all of you in one way or another have made it possible for me to be in ministry, for me to learn more about ministry, that inspired me with all the different things that you do here at our church or beyond in your own ministries, in churches or in your everyday lives. So thank you so much. I'm not going to go on too long because Jenny said not to go on too long.
You're welcome.
She's sitting right here keeping a close track of me, so I'll try to do that. So I just want to give a few words of introduction, and then I thought I'd offer 3 readings from the book, kind of different samples of different parts of the book, which I hope you'll enjoy and give you a flavor for the book as a whole. A lot of people ask me, why would you write a book? And often it's because you're crazy in some way. Maybe it's a sense of calling, that there are stories to be told, stories of my congregation, and I counted up, there were 50 different ministry leaders or congregations that I talk about in the book. People who are doing really remarkable ministry in many different forms around the country. And so to help lift up those stories of the people who are doing really beautiful ministry in a time when a lot of the stories that you hear about religion, about church, is about decline. And people are just doing wonderful work, so I wanted to lift that up. And we live in a changing world and a changing religious culture. So Pew Research just released a report a few weeks ago that said now 23% of American adults are nuns, are religiously unaffiliated, so aren't members of a congregation. And that number goes up to 36% when you're talking about younger millennials, 19 to 25 years. And so we just live in a culture where fewer people go to church. We see that by a lot of your relatives. Don't go to church, or don't go to church as much of a regular basis. So regular church attendance looks different than it once did for people. Or people are connected and belong to churches in lots of different ways. And so, how do we honor those ways and stay connected to people, even though they might not be walking through our doors every Sunday morning? I also wanted to talk about the ways in which technology is changing the way that we live our lives. So these little supercomputers that we carry around in our pockets really have changed our lives in dramatic ways. So we are living through what Barry Wellman and Lee Rainey have called in their book, Network, the New Social Operating System. They call it the triple revolution. The social media revolution, the internet revolution, and the mobile technology revolution. And they're all hitting us at one time. And so, the way that you listen to music changes, the way you communicate with people changes, the way you get directions, the GPS on your smartphone has changed the way that we get from one place to another. So it's really deeply embedded more and more every year into our lives. And that's a little unsettling for a lot of people, but it is our reality. So how do we operate in a networked, digitally integrated, and also spiritually distributed world? So where people are practicing their faiths in lots of different places, in lots of different ways, often with the assistance of their digital devices. And so I think there's something to be told, a story to be told about that. And I think there's a lot of hope involved in what's happening in those spaces. Another question people ask me is why cathedrals? Why would you write about cathedrals, especially since Lutherans don't have cathedrals? Seems like an odd choice. I am with an Episcopal publishing house and they do have cathedrals. So that sort of makes sense. I visited a lot of cathedrals when Jenny and I traveled in Europe years ago, but had never really studied them, except I do have a love for medieval history and the medieval church, and that's where a lot of Gothic cathedrals were born. But for me, cathedrals represent a more expansive understanding of way of being church in the world. So it's not just what happens on Sunday morning in a church building, but it's what happens when we live out our ministries in our daily lives and encounter God in those spaces. Or when we go to the pub or the coffee shop or the barber shop or the train station for Ashes to go. That God meets us in all of these places. And in some ways we've reduced church to just one time and one place. And God, we know, is much, much bigger than that. And so there are really three main ideas in the book that I try to get at. There's probably lots more than that, but and probably some I didn't get at. But I try to talk about a more expansive way of being church and practicing ministry today. So if people aren't walking through our doors, how do we connect with people where they are? The intersection of faith and technology. So how does technology shape our faith, and how does our faith shape technology and our use of it? And then how do we find God in the midst of our everyday lives? We're so busy, our days take us here, there, and everywhere. And what are the ways in which we can connect with God, even in the very mundane, very routine parts of our everyday lives? So those are some of the things I try to get at in the book. And I want to read a few selections, and I'm going to keep an eye on you, and if you're fading, I'll just cut it short. I've never done one of these before, so I tried to pick ones that were representative of the book that I hope you'll like, and somebody flagged me if people are falling asleep. So the first selection I want to read from is from the introduction, which is called Building a Digital Cathedral. And it sort of introduces the idea of what cathedrals are for me in this project, and it talks about a visit that Jenny and I made to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. We had come to New York City to celebrate my wife's birthday. It was a quick overnight visit, just enough time to see a Broadway show and squeeze in a little sightseeing. The morning after the show, we made the typical tourist rounds through Times Square, Central Park, and finally the Rockefeller Center. But as we walked along Fifth Avenue on that crisp March day, the place I was most excited about visiting was the storied St. Patrick's Cathedral. St. Pat's, as it's affectionately called, is a famously beautiful church, the seat of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York, and greatly beloved among New Yorkers. However, when we turned the corner, the famed neo-Gothic facade was nearly unrecognizable. It turns out St. Pat's was in the midst of a $175 million restoration project, and nearly every inch of the church was covered in some kind of scaffold or white plastic sheeting. Although I was disappointed, I couldn't help but think it was an apt symbol for a book about cathedrals, and about how the church needs to renovate and reconstruct itself to meet the demands of 21st century ministry. As if to dispel any doubt of that, the wrapping around the scaffolding at the corner of Fifth Avenue and East 50th Street said, "Check in on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at St. Pat's NYC." Perhaps it would be too much to call this a sign from God. Yet I couldn't help but feel it was an auspicious beginning on this first of many cathedral visits for this book. We entered St. Pat's beneath that sign, through the western doors, from the vestibule, the small portal just inside the doors, into the nave, the main part of the cathedral, which was covered in an astounding lattice work of aluminum scaffolding. In yet another sign of our digitally integrated age, we tapped our names into the touchscreen digital guest book. The main part of the nave was closed off due to the construction, and so, along with other pilgrims there that day, we walked along the ambulatory, the walkway along the side of the nave. I lighted a candle at the shrine of St. John the Evangelist, and then walked across the front of the nave. From there we could see the bishop's chair. The word cathedral comes from the Latin cathedra, meaning chair, as cathedrals are the seat of the bishop. And beyond that rose the high altar, considered the most sacred place in any cathedral. We found a seat in the pews near the front of the nave, and as the sounds of workmen restoring stonework echoed down from high above, I contemplated this combination of metal and stone, the juxtaposition of the medieval form and modern repair. The study in contrast in St. Patrick's went beyond just the architectural renovation, I realized. There was also a renovation in practices of relationship happening. I watched as people talked to one another in hushed tones, prayed, and gazed around the cathedral as any medieval pilgrim would have. But they also snapped pictures and took videos on their smartphones. As I had, I expect that many others checked in on Facebook or posted pictures on Instagram. Indeed, it seems that St. Patrick's has become something of a digital cathedral that engages a diversity of visitors, Christians and others who appreciate the beauty and respite offered in the cathedral by inviting connection in both local and extended digital social spaces. I had come to St. Patrick's searching for inspiration for this book, and as so many others before me, spiritual insight. I ponder the unique place cathedrals have in the religious landscape and the enduring hold they seem to have on the spiritual imagination. Indeed, a recent study of English cathedrals reported that in the first part of this new century, even with the significant declines in religious affiliation and church membership, cathedrals are receiving significant renewed interest, as well as increased attendance. Surely one of the reasons cathedrals capture our imagination is simply because they are often so old and so big. To stand in the nave of the medieval Gothic cathedral like Notre Dame in Paris, completed in 1272, is to be in awe by what was accomplished by generations of medieval craftsmen with rather primitive tools. Because of the cathedral of that era took decades to complete, years that would typically extend across the lifetimes of many craftsmen, their construction by the hands of ordinary masons, stone carvers, joiners, and common laborers seems even more grand and complex, almost defying the imagination. As renowned cathedral historian Robert Scott writes, one of the defining qualities of the Gothic style is that it made the doable seem impossible. But there is still much more to cathedrals than their age and their size. They are known for their beauty, the beauty of their architecture, liturgy, music, and the arts. Those who minister in cathedral are also deeply rooted in their local communities, often advocating for social justice and engaged in secular and civic partnerships. Tracy Lynn, Dean of Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Cleveland, Ohio, shared with me, "I like to call the urban cathedral at its best a piazza, a place of celebration and culture and conversation and collaboration and even commerce." Their unique ministry is distinct from parishes, though, as we will see, much of it can be adapted to the parish context. Importantly, cathedrals welcome people with a wide range of beliefs and practices, and those with none at all. They have a sense of openness that mimics Gothic architecture with its spaciousness, light, and flying buttresses. They serve as a corrective to a church that is in many ways closed in on itself. Is that good, Jim? That sense of closing in, that last line of contrasting the expansiveness with the cathedral with this instinct I think some churches are having at this time where they're struggling with membership and attendance to close in on themselves. And that's sort of that's a little Lutheran speak for sin. Lutherans talk about sin as turning in on oneself. And so, in a time of rapid change, one of the instincts that we have is to lament what is lost and to maintain what we have. And a lot of people are doing that. And so Digital Cathedral is a call for people to be open to new possibilities about what God is doing in them and their congregations and in the world, and to think more expansively about how that can happen. So at this point, I want to introduce you to and invite my friend Callista Isabel to come to the front. Callista was good enough to drive down from Allentown today to be here, and we're old friends from New England Synod. I'm old, you're not. So you'll have to stand in front of the painting so the live stream can get you. Callista is the chaplain at Muhlenberg College. And so we've sort of migrated from the Northeast. She was previously one of the chaplains at Yale and took position in Muhlenberg, and then I came down and took position in Upper Dublin. And Callista was one of the people I interviewed for the book. And her wisdom about ministry and the Digital Cathedral and campus ministry was like so wonderful. So it's in chapter 9. We need to go on. I invited Callista just to say a few words about how this idea of being in Cathedral plays out in her ministry.
Thanks, Keith, and what a joy to be with you all. What a warm and welcoming congregation this is, and building, and the community spirit is contagious from the second you walk in this door, so thank you. I'm curious how many of you have been to New Orleans, Louisiana, or heard much about the city? A fair number of you. So as I was reading Keith's book, the word parish came to mind, because if you're familiar with New Orleans, you've certainly heard the word parish to describe a geographic area. The Orleans Parish, the St. Bernard Parish, they've basically chopped the city up into these smaller sections. They equate them sort of like to our counties, but they're smaller even. But the way we more traditionally use parish up this way is to describe a particular congregation with a particular set of members, perhaps appointed leadership that worships within certain walls at a particular time, usually on a Sunday morning. Nothing wrong with that use of the word parish at all. But reading Keith's book, I was drawn to the use of the word parish in the New Orleanian sense of that word, thinking about it as a geographic kind of area, that we might be called to break beyond the church doors and be more attentive to our whole surrounding neighborhoods and communities, and indeed country, on a day that we are drawn to places like Charleston and elsewhere. So I think about this broader sense of parish in my work as a college chaplain. I'm called to be a pastor to a particular subset of our community at Muhlenberg, the Protestant students, where I am part of the Word and Sacrament ministry there. I'm also called to be the chaplain to everybody on that campus community of any or no faith tradition. In that sense of that broader parish is how we're trying to live this out in a college campus. And I think something for all of us to take seriously. We often do turn in on ourselves for lots of valid reasons, but I think Keith's book consistently calls us to break beyond church doors, break beyond our own fears, some of our assumptions, and dare to embody the gospel in more broader ways. I think about that as I walk the sidewalk at Muhlenberg College and bump into students who I might not ever see in my office tucked away in the back of the chapel. And if they look like they might want to check in for a second, even if they're rushing off to class this way, I will turn around and walk with them and rush with them for just a minute so I can just check in about how their day is going. The same thing is happening online. Just today I happened to be hanging out on Facebook and noticed a student who was visibly grieving through his Facebook posts about Charleston. So we private messaged for a little while and his grief just poured out. Now, we happened to both be in Allentown, but we weren't face to face. We happened to be both connected with Muhlenberg, but we weren't on the same campus. And so the same spirit of that kind of wandering around campus and bumping into people is happening for many of us in the digital world. And so Keith's book, this call to be both located in our specific parish life, but also to think about that parish more broadly, our call to always be Christ's hands and feet and eyes and ears in a broader sense of the world, resonates so much with how I try to do my ministry. And I just want to thank you for empowering all of us through these 50 examples and stories of your own that you wove together so beautifully in this book, that I hope you all find encouragement, because we are all ministers together in this world. And so thanks for the opportunity to be with you tonight. Thank you.
In New England, we call that a wicked smile. Thank you, bless and just by happenstance, the next story I want to share from the book is the story of another New Englander. There are New Englanders represented pretty well across this book. That's where I spent my formative years in divinity school and seminary, and in my first call, so about 15 years altogether. And one of those people that I really look up to in ministry is Bishop Jim Hazelwood, who's the Lutheran ELCA bishop of the New England Synod. And he's a real pioneer as far as bishops or any other minister goes, and combining face-to-face and digital ministry. So often when we talk about technology, sometimes people immediately kind of get a little fearful because it can be really overwhelming. But then part of the worry too is, well, is that just going to take over everything, and it's just going to be all digital, and we're just going to sit in front of our screens from where we are and be church that way? And I don't think so. I think we have this need, as we see here tonight, we have this face-to-face group gathered here, and we have an online community that's connected with us on the live stream and Twitter too. And so we need to continue to find ways to hold these both together with integrity. And Jim does that really beautifully. And so this is the beginning of chapter 5. I try to start each chapter with a story, it's, like a preacher would. And this is called Exercising Incarnational Imagination. Okay, everybody, take out your cell phones. The newly consecrated bishop of the New England Synod of the ELCA, Jim Hazelwood, had only been on the job for a few days and was now standing before a group of 500 teenagers at the annual Synod-wide youth gathering at Hammonasset State Park in Connecticut. A group of adolescents that size can strike terror into even the most seasoned speakers. Under the circumstances, the newly consecrated Hazelwood could have been forgiven for taking his allotted 15 minutes to introduce himself and talk about his hopes and plans for the Synod. Instead, Hazelwood flipped the traditional script and invited the youth gathered there to talk and text with him. He posted his personal cell phone number on a screen and invited the youth to text him their questions, and he would respond. He told them, "You can text me any question you want, from the silly to the significant," and they did. He says, "Within 2 minutes, my phone was just on fire. I had 369 text messages." He says, "I totally overshot my monthly texting plan." He received silly texts from the teens, asking him to say their names, share his favorite color, daring him to dance. But they also posed serious questions, like why suffering exists, why prayer seems to go unanswered, what is the Holy Spirit, and do you think God sends unbelievers to hell? He had far more questions than he expected, more than he could answer in such a short time. So the next day he recorded a video of himself reading questions from his cell phone and offering some answers and posted it on YouTube. It was so well received that talk and text has now become an annual tradition at the Hammonasset event. Reflecting on why this approach works so well, he writes, "I'm not telling them to deny the reality of the world they live in by condemning social media or text messaging. Actually, I'm embracing it. They appreciate it. I may be having fun with them, even a little silly, but I remain the adult in the room. In other words, when I answer their questions honestly, they appreciate and respect me. It's interactive. We no longer live in a world of presentations, except for tonight." He says, "We live in a world of engagement. I'm completely vulnerable, and they appreciate the risk I am taking. They see me goof up, struggle, and when I don't know, well, they like that I don't know." In this, Hazelwood demonstrates networked and relational, accessible and authentic leadership. He allows himself to be put on the spot, responding in real time to the needs, questions, and concerns of those gathered. It is conversational, responsive, and social, rather than the all too common synodical or diocesan infomercial with "now a word from our bishop." He may not have been using social media per se, but he did find a relational and digitally integrated way of engaging with the youth and adult leaders present there. He let the teens set the agenda with their questions, and he responded. In what has become a hallmark of his tenure as bishop, Hazelwood demonstrated his ability and the potential for other ministers to weave together digital and face-to-face engagement for the building up of the church and for the sake of the gospel. Hazelwood easily ranks as one of the more social media savvy bishops in the country. Soon after being elected bishop, he launched a website and blog called Bishop on a Bike. The bike is his motorcycle, where he posts writing and video about church leadership, nuns, missional church, and creative ministry ideas and practices. He has continued to use the same Facebook profile he had before being elected bishop, and has added a Twitter account, a YouTube channel, and most recently an Instagram account. With all these platforms at his disposal and his social media acumen, Hazelwood could have easily over-relied on these media to connect with his geographically diverse synod of 185 congregations flung far across the 5 New England states and upper New York. But Hazelwood has dedicated himself to being physically present across his synod. When he was first elected as bishop, Hazelwood set an audacious goal: to visit all the congregations in the New England Synod in his first year. That would be one congregation every other day in a territory of over 70,000 square miles. Hazelwood explains that this came from a pastoral impulse to know the Synod and a piece of wisdom from Edwin Freeman's family systems theory: you cannot impact a system you are not connected to. When I spoke to Hazelwood via Skype, of course, he had visited all but 3 congregations in his first 18 months in office. Not quite his original goal, but still a remarkable feat, visiting at a rate of 10 congregations per month. Some days he had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with 3 different congregations. After a while, he said, it can be hard to remember where you are. Quote, it was kind of like for a lot of bands when they go out on tour. They get lost to where they are, so there's a big sign before you go on stage. You are in Pittsburgh. So they come out on stage and go, Pittsburgh, how are you? And they don't say the city name again because they don't remember. His dizzying efforts have been greatly appreciated by those he visits and those who follow his travels on social media. On these jaunts, Hazelwood again blends the digital and face-to-face. When he visits with the congregation, he takes pictures, at the very least, of the outside of the building, the sanctuary, and some of the people, and posts them on Facebook. In so doing, Hazelwood helps to tell the story of these congregations and ministries, giving others a window into the life of these faith communities. All his videos, tweets, pictures, blog posts, check-ins, and status updates tell the story of a synod as composed of people, churches, and communities, and not just the office of the bishop. At times, he documents his visits in greater detail, such as blogging about celebrating Chinese New Year at a new Lutheran Chinese congregation in Boston, leading the Synod Men's Retreat at Camp Calumet in northern New Hampshire, and even patching a pothole outside the Synod office. He says that social media is really key, because I could be doing this prior to the web, prior to social media, and maybe I would write a newsletter at the end of the month. Even if it was the early 1990s, you could photocopy a picture of 1 or maybe 2 places you had been, but the delay on that would be a month later. But this way, the instant aspect of it is really giving people a sense in almost real time of what I'm doing. And 90% of it is done with a smartphone. And in an ironic twist, when things are shared online, they can actually become more real for people. I often tell people that if something isn't online, it's like it didn't happen. Just sharing a few pictures and checking in on social media has a huge impact. Immediately, you've expanded your audience from 30 people at the local church to hundreds, perhaps even thousands. And those pictures and experiences are captured and preserved as a kind of digital archive. It creates a deeper connection not only to the bishop, but to brothers and sisters in Christ in other neighborhoods and communities. Hazelwood says that he picks up new Facebook friends and Twitter followers with each visit. So the connection he makes during his in-person visits continue to grow and deepen online, well beyond New England. As one colleague observed through social media, Hazelwood has become a bishop to many people beyond his own sin. My timekeeper. And in fact, just today, I had another Skype conversation with Bishop Hazelwood this morning because he wanted to interview me for the book, so we did a little 10-minute Skype interview. So if you see me wearing the same thing, it's because it was the same day. It's on social media, and he's a great model of ministry. He's really encouraging the New England Synod to be a synod of experimentation, encouraging the pastors and the congregations just to experiment, just to try things, and doing really wonderful stuff. So the third and final reading I have for tonight is about a very different kind of cathedral. And then I'm going to open up for questions from Twitter, if we have any questions from Twitter, and here as well. So one of the ministries, it's really hard to choose which ones to read tonight because they're all like my babies. And all of these, by and large, a lot of these people are my friends, or they became my friends by the writing of the book. And the best part about writing the book was interviewing the people to ask them about their ministry and to say, I see what you're doing and I think it's really interesting. Could you tell me why? And the stories of why are really compelling. So my favorite part was doing the interviews. My least favorite part of the book was doing all the transcribing of the interviews because I talked with people for like an hour. And I kind of came up with a system for time stamping my notes about, when I could go back and say, oh, that I want to be sure I captured up. I recorded everything, and then I went back to transcribe. So the best part was helping to put together these stories and to share them with others. So at the beginning of chapter 11 on evangelism, sharing the gospel for the sake of the gospel, I read about Cathedral in the Night, which is a very different kind of cathedral. So one of the critiques about cathedrals that can easily be made is cathedrals were always the seat of power. They were the seat of the bishop in the Middle Ages. And even if you have ever read or watched Pillars of the Earth, like that's wealth, that's power, that's authority. And often cathedrals were kind of bulwarks against heresy, because everything in the cathedral is like a statement of Orthodox theology. And so there's a rightful critique about cathedrals in that way. But there's a lot about cathedrals, even themselves, that subverted that, those kind of things, the way, I can go on and I don't have time, but it's in the book, but cathedrals can be very open. Went off. Cool, batteries. Do you want me to use the handheld? Okay, how's that? So this is a ministry called Cathedral in the Night in Northampton, Massachusetts. On Sunday evenings at the corner of Main Street and Center Street in Northampton, Massachusetts, a makeshift cathedral rises up from the sidewalk. It is called Cathedral in the Night, an ecumenical street ministry started by the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and the United Church of Christ. Here at their weekly worship services, 4 freestanding lamps illuminate the sidewalk as people gather around 2 tables. The table at the center of the gathering is an altar covered with simple fabrics, bread and wine, and a cross. The other table is filled with food prepared by volunteers for the community dinner to follow. Gathered here are the homeless, the housed, local college students and professors, members of various congregations, and among all of these groups, no few nuns, the religiously unaffiliated. I asked one of the pastors at the Cathedral in the Night, Steph Smith, why they decided to use the term cathedral for their name. She said, "We really wanted to be a bit edgy and play with some of the church language in order to expand what church means. The cathedral is more than a building. It is a whole area and the neighborhood. We wanted to be evocative in the terminology to get people asking, what is church? Is it the big building or is it the people? We wanted to push the boundaries of what church is because we are a church that has no boundaries. We have no walls. Not only do we not have physical walls, a lot of what we do breaks down walls that we have inside ourselves to really think about our own prejudices and stereotypes around poverty." Founded in 2011, Cathedral in the Night stands in a long tradition of cathedrals serving the poor. For centuries, cathedrals have served as places of hospitality and refuge for those in need. As Tracy Lind, Dean of Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Cleveland, told me, cathedrals have often been places of welcome for the hungry and the homeless, the destitute of the city, and the sojourner. Cathedral in the Night also embodies many of the characteristics of life and ministry in the digital cathedral, particularly for the way it envisions a networked community with a wide sense of belonging. It's not an outreach to the homeless. Rather, it is focused on being a church community together, part of Smith's blurring the boundaries and deconstructing walls. She says, on an average night, we really have a mixture of people. There are people who are homeless. There are a lot of people with homes who are just struggling with poverty in general. But then there are people who are just looking for something different, and this is out of the box. Or they are committed to a Sunday morning church, but they still want to come Sunday night. It really runs the gamut. And don't assume you know. You could look around and say, I think that person is homeless. They could be a professor at Hampshire College. You don't know. The worship is designed to reinforce this sense of unity. During the service, a microphone is passed around to anyone who would like to share a prayer, concern, song, or story. People light up and see themselves as a leader and as having something to offer, which is not something they've really been told, felt, or lived into, says Smith. At the offering, people are given wooden tokens, shells, or rocks, with the names of different gifts written on them, like humor, being a good friend, listening, or sobriety. Congregants place them inside the hollow wooden cross on the altar. Smith says, we don't want a monetary gift. We ask for something greater at Cathedral. We ask for you to become your own offering. In doing so, the service affirms the unique giftedness and contribution of each person, regardless of their means or the reason they came to be at Cathedral that night. It's worth noting that the empowerment and affirmation that comes with passing the microphone and placing tokens in the cross echoes what happens online in social media spaces. Today, people have their own digital platforms from which to share, speak, and advocate. They don't need to wait to be endorsed or recognized by a news outlet or church body. Equipped with a free blog, Facebook, or Twitter account, or a mobile phone, people can make their voice heard, tell their stories, and make change in the world. In this way, the practice of passing the microphone at Cathedral in the night is not only contextually appropriate as well as just and compassionate, it is also culturally resonant in a digital age. In its worship and wider ministry, Cathedral in the night demonstrates a broad understanding of and appreciation for who is part of the community. It includes those gathered for worship, those who hang around the edges of the assembly, as well as those who walk or drive by. It includes partner congregations who come from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, to assist with worship and supply food for the meal afterwards. They are all in Cathedral. Smith explains, people are walking by all the time when we are having church. One time we were singing This Little Light of Mine, and a woman belted out the song with us as she walked by. Or you'll notice people standing on the edge and never see them again. Or they'll stay on the edge, and over the course of a couple of weeks, they'll get closer and closer until one Sunday they want to lead the Lord's Prayer. And people will say that this is a place where they feel welcome just as they are. Cathedral in the Night is a ministry with those on the margins, not only the margins of society, the poor and the homeless, but also those on the margins of the church. It exists in between the traditional church and the world it often fails to engage, as well as the various in-betweens of diverse distributed religious and spiritual practice today. It beautifully demonstrates the ways in which, as Belden Lane writes, the periphery often becomes the locus of the holy. Like Cathedral in the Night, congregations and ministry leaders must also cultivate a broader sense of who is connected and belongs to our faith communities. Membership decline across the church has led many ministry leaders to fixate on the shrinking numbers of people in their church pews, which has blinded many of us to how, thanks to digital and mobile technologies, we are connected to more people than ever. Even as our congregations have become smaller, our networks and therefore our opportunities for building community and sharing the gospel have become larger and more expansive. We need to let drop our binary and dichotomous classification of people as either member or non-member, affiliated or none, real or virtual, and shift to a more networked approach, recognizing that people are linked and belong to our churches in a variety of ways. For their part, nuns are not necessarily looking for a single faith community to join for the rest of their lives, and so the assumption or insistence on a single durable model of membership-based affiliation in the church misses the diverse ways in which the unaffiliated, as well as the affiliated, engage spiritually and engage spirituality and religion. We need to conceive of our churches as broadly networked communities and the people in them as all falling in Cathedral. I'd like to take some questions. And Brendan, do we have any questions on Twitter?
There is.
Is there anybody out there?
Well, there's one question. So this is a church is too sacred a space for smartphones and social media. So how pervasive is this view?
How pervasive is it? Well, a lot of people do. So the question, so I'll repeat it for the live stream. I was reminded today. The idea that church is too sacred of a space to incorporate smartphones and texts in worship. Well, a lot of people have that view. But I wonder, what happens then when we use those devices to share, the stories that and the good news that's being shared in our congregations. So every Sunday here at church, one of the members of our band, Perry Wolf, checks in on Facebook, tags a bunch of people, me included, every Sunday. So I'm walking to church and it's like I get all these tags on Facebook. And he usually just does the name of one of the songs they're going to sing. But then he has friends who are not church people that respond to him and say, have a blessed day, or they might have a little exchange. And there are a lot of cases of people at church who do that here. And so we are sharing some of the life, we're evangelizing, we're sharing the good news through these digital devices. Can they become distractions? Yes, and I'm totally as guilty as anybody else. But they can be the means for faith formation and for evangelism and for sharing our story and God's story. So in the book, I talk a lot about breaking down this dichotomy that we make between the sacred and the secular. We've really separated those out, or the digital and the face-to-face. And so it's one of my favorite things that I talk about in the book is the ways in which we can imagine these things being much more integrated. And that's one of the things that cathedrals do, that they incorporated the sacred and the secular all together. Anytime you visit a cathedral, you'll see some combination of the two. Thank you. Thank you, Twitter person. Catch up with you later. Any questions here in the room? Questions or comments?
Do you always feel like you'll have a need for digital cathedral along with a physical place to go?
Good question.
Church? Yeah, because you still get that human contact.
Yeah, good question. So will you, do you feel like you'll, tell me if I get it right, both have a strong sense of place as well as kind of a more expansive view? And I think that's right. For me in my ministry, pastoring 2 congregations with a strong sense of place, I really love that sense of sacred space that's long and enduring. Like this church has been around since 1753. And to me, that is just amazing that, here we are tonight. But at the same time, recognizing that we can gather in these other places as well. So for me, it's a combination of the two. Now, in other churches, like one of the churches I talk about in the book, Humble Walk Lutheran Church, is a Mission Start church in the ELCA, and they have no desire to have a church building. And what they do, I talk about in chapter 2, they gather all over their neighborhood, sort of like what we do with God on Tap and Coffee and Conversation, that is their church. And so the local pub and the coffee shop and the park and the bus stop are kind of, I call it, they make their neighborhood their cathedral. So there are definitely different ways to come at that.
Virtual communion.
Virtual communion, that's sort of, that's the big cutting edge that a lot of people are talking about. So what does that do for our sense of incarnation if God is truly present in the bread and wine? Next book. Not anytime soon. Any other questions? Questions or comments? Yeah.
Are you and your digital network planning in any way to connect with the papal visit that's upcoming?
Hey,
Jim.
can I tweet to the Pope on that one?
Yes, please. At Pontifex.
Ad hominem.
Yes. At Pope in Philly. Okay. Well, Stacy Moore here is our photographer tonight. Is going to be you're helping cover, in some way. Do you want to tell us about it?
Many meetings for the PHLC.
Yeah, it's very exciting that Pope Francis coming to Philadelphia. And it will be interesting to see. There's so much physical, logistical, questions about how that all happens. But it's going to be interesting to see what the digital elements of that visit entail, especially on the heels of his encyclical today on the environment, which is such a big deal. So there'll be a lot of follow-up on that when he's in the States. I write about Pope Francis in chapter 4 on relational ministry, because compared to different Benedict, compared to Pope Benedict, it's a very different temperament, different style, but it's so much more suited to a social media world. He himself says, I'm no social media guru, I don't, but his relational way of being, taking selfies with people, and all these things that he does, is that relational gesture really fits for a social media world. And so you see, Francis is so much of a better fit than, in my opinion, Benedict was, at least for our digital culture.
I have a question. Yeah. In your observation and experience, so often we see things like this in generational camps. Do you feel that is the case also with our accepting the broader view of where the church is? Is it deeply entrenched in generational camps or not?
The question is, does this really break down generationally, according to how we think about ways of being church? And I travel a good bit, and I think it really, maybe it's the audiences I speak to, but I don't think it's a rule that generationally, generations are one way or another. And there's so many people who are highly engaged. Now, maybe 8 years ago, You might have seen that where younger people were on social media, but the fastest growing demographic on Facebook continues to be middle-aged women, because we're keeping up with our kids and our grandkids that way. So I think there's been a lot of shift in that regard. So I don't see it as sort of a generational entrenchment. And my goodness, people here, so many people here in Upper Dublin that participate in so many of the things that we do that way are so inspiring. So sometimes we get into that sense of the generational clash in church, and I don't think it's that simple or that clean. And younger people can also be more entrenched, even younger than me in the church. Sometimes there's a backlashy kind of thing that happens in the church, and you can get really strident younger ministry leaders too. So it can go both ways. Right?
We've got another question from the internet. How do we create community in the digital cathedral versus the way that we do it in our face-to-face communities?
How do we create community in the digital cathedral as opposed to face-to-face? Well, for me, they complement each other. So it used to be back in the day, 10 years ago. But you would see most people at church on Sunday morning, and then you probably wouldn't see them. You might see them at a committee meeting during the week, but by and large, most people you would see once a week on Sunday if they made it to church on Sunday. And that was it. And then, when Facebook rolled around, you got to have all these connections with people and get these windows into my parishioners' lives that I never saw before. Things they were passionate about, things they cared about, and I could engage with them on that. And so the digital and the face-to-face for me complement each other and strengthen one another. So we are connected face-to-face in person, and then when we're in a digital space, I feel more connected to you in a digital space because we've had that face-to-face time. So my life is a story of knowing people digitally for even years, and then finally meeting them face-to-face is the story of my life. And it's such a celebration when you finally meet somebody in person. You're like, oh. And then you have to do the awkward thing about, like, how do I pronounce your name? Because I've only seen it printed. And you say, now, where do you actually live again? Because I only know you on, I only know where you are on Facebook. And so there's that, but then I see these people and I meet them in face-to-face. And then when, maybe we live in different places and we go back online, and I feel such a stronger sense of belonging to that person and connection to that person because we've had that time face-to-face. And I tell some stories, my own personal stories of that. That happens over and over again. So I think we can hold those two together, but in those times when we can't be physically connected, we can be digitally connected over time. Sally?
Some of us were present on a Sunday morning when you preached about mourning the loss of a friend.
Yes.
And I just can't imagine feeling as we did if that had happened digitally.
Yeah. So at a sermon some weeks ago now, I talked about our friend Sarah Dalzell, for whom we had this project that we called Sneakers for Sarah. And we posted, and I write about it in the book as well, where we posted pictures of people with Chuck Taylors on, because for her that was a kind of a sign of love and support. And so every time she went into the hospital each week, we would post pictures of those Chuck Taylors as a sign of love and support. So when she and her husband Dave went to the hospital, they would know they were cared and loved for. And then when she went into hospice care, the end of where it became the end of her life, people shared more and more and more. And Converse even sent her, custom-made shoes, which just meant the world to her. So I finished writing that before I could include that, but I talked about it in the sermon. And what continues to happen even now? People are still posting pictures of Chuck Taylors, and they post them to her husband Dave as a sign of support in his grief. So none of us knew when all this started that this is what would happen, but we now live nowhere close to them. We continue to share our love and support for them in that way. So yeah, it's kind of one of those moments in ministry. I was saying to somebody earlier before we started, there are these moments that happen. Like there are lots of moments. There are lots of small aha moments. And then there are these moments you're like, this is really real. This is real ministry. This is real relationship. This is real love. And for me, Sneakers for Sarah is certainly one of those experiences.
And they still post to her page.
Yes, they post to her page as well. Yeah.
And there's also a Sneakers for Sarah page that posts also.
So that's one of
She's
the.
on that digital space.
So it's one of the interesting things that people are exploring now. What is death? What is death in a digital age? when people's Facebook profiles become memorial pages, and people continue to leave messages for that person, as if you would visit a gravestone, in the cemetery. And so there's a whole bunch of writing and study on what is death in the digital age. So I should close it now because we're going to leave time. So we're going to wrap up the live stream. So thank you, everybody. I look forward to kind of checking the tweets later, and we thank you for your support and being a part of this. And the recording of this will be available online, so we'll make the recording available. And thanks to Ted Mansura for running that. Thanks to Brendan for being our tweet curator tonight. I'm going to thank Dottie, Teresa, Patty, and our staff for putting together this beautiful wine and cheese and this beautiful evening. None of us have ever done anything like this before. Just a beautiful night. There are so many people to thank, and thank you all for coming out and being a part of this. And I really feel your love and support, and I'm really grateful. Thank you. So there are books available, like 55 copies of the book. So what we're going to do is, in that where Brendan's sitting right now in the corner, I'm going to move over there. And if you'd like to purchase a book, or if you brought a book with you, you can purchase a book there. Dottie is going to help coordinate that. And you can purchase a book, and I'd be happy to sign it. So I'll be in the corner. And thank you all so much again. The books are $20. Cash or check. If you make a check, make it out to me. And I'll see you over there. Thank you. Bye. Make it out to Jenny.